Our next session, which is all about transport. I've just been reading the timetable and discovered I'm meant to speak for 3 minutes, which I will probably not quite manage, but I will endeavour to do so. A while ago, somebody came up to me in the streets and said, "Is it really you on the telly?" And I said, "Yes, it is." And he said, "Gosh, Krishna Guru-Murthy, I'm delighted." So I just want to make it absolutely clear to everybody that I'm not Krishna Guru-Murthy. I am Arif Ansari, BBC's North West political editor, and Krishna has disappeared back to London as far as I'm aware. So thank you for being here today. My panel, I've got a lot to say about transport in the Northern Powerhouse in general. We have Councillor Judith Blake, the leader of Leeds City Council, Joe Anderson, the Mayor of Liverpool, Philip Graham, who's the Chief Executive of the National Infrastructure Commission, and Duncan, who's a Senior Policy Officer at ResPublica. Transport was always one of those, was really always the key issue in many ways, I think, when George Osborne launched the Northern Powerhouse, because he was talking, and even before he did actually, because he was talking about linking the city so that they could work more cohesively to try and build one labour market. And one of the questions which has dominated the last few years is the extent to which that has been delivered or is being delivered. We know about the major projects like HS2, Western Markover, HS3, plus of course upgrades to motorways and all the rest of it. But we'll try to there's a lot going on and a lot that perhaps isn't going on, and that's what I kind of want to try and get some of the answers today as to where we stand in terms of transport. Anyway, since this is a session on transport, I'm glad to see everybody's managed to make it here on the panel, and we're going to hear from each of them in turn, then we'll have a discussion and then take questions. So, Judith, I wonder if you'd be willing to start. Can I ask you, how was your journey from Leeds?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Arif. My journey here was fine. I'm less optimistic about my journey back because I'm going back over the M62. And I'm sure many of you realise that can be a wonderful 30-minute journey, or it can be 3 hours, depending on what happens. But very pleased to be here today, and obviously I think all of us are still in a bit of a state of shock, if I'm honest. The last 3 weeks really for us have been seismic, and a lot of reassessment going on in so many areas of the work that we do. So I hope from the contributions you've had today, the conversations you've already had, one of the key things coming through is the major imbalance in terms of resource coming into the north. And I think the figures around infrastructure generally, you're talking about a figure of £2,604 per head in London and the South East, as opposed to £380 in the north. And when you come onto transport and you look at the investment per head, you're looking at something like 10 times higher investment in the south and the southeast, in London and the southeast in particular. I don't think I need to spell out to you just how closely linked transport and infrastructure investment is in terms of unlocking the economy. And particularly, we believe, working very closely with Joe and other northern leaders, we believe firmly that the North is capable of turning around the economic situation of this country if we are given at least a level playing field to enable us to do it. One of the things I think is interesting is when we talk about transport, and forgive me if I'm wrong, but the reaction mostly from people is to think about the big shiny schemes. But if you actually go out and talk to people in our communities, people who can't get to work because there isn't a bus that leaves on time to get them where they need to go, then obviously the big infrastructure investment, HS2, etc., are crucial, and particularly in terms of giving confidence but actually the problems we have got in our major conurbations around congestion, just being able to get from A to B around the edges, are the issues that we've really got to crack with people. And I think the links with, you know, how are we going to make sure when we secure the, you know, definitely massive investment that we need, that we have got the skills in the workforce to deliver the transport schemes going forward. All of these major issues. But you know, HS2 is critical for us in Leeds. It has already made an enormous difference to the confidence in the city. And we're going out on a very ambitious note for Leeds and in its place within the north of England. And for example, Burberry, iconic international brand, has chosen to relocate its factory right back in the industrial heartland of Leeds city centre. And one of the key reasons they give for that decision is that they will be within a 10-minute walk of the new station hub, which we've put forward. One station bringing HS2 right into the heart of Leeds city station, and then regarding that as a hub, linking out to the immediate Leeds city region, but beyond, and up to the northeast and hopefully up to Scotland as well. But the state of transport in the north is chronic. I don't know how many of you are actually from the north or have experience of just getting around. It is dire, and let's not even mess about trying to describe it as anything other than that, and it cannot be allowed to continue. So, difficult times. Clearly, Brexit is a major issue for us in terms of how we can make sure if the funding is repatriated, that we will get money coming to the areas where we're expecting it to come in through the ESIF bids that we've got in, for example. There are no guarantees of that at all. So a huge case for us to continue to make. I'm delighted to be here today to hear your views and how we can continue to move things forward.
Thank you very much, Judith. Next up, Joanne, the Mayor of Liverpool, currently running for the Labour nomination for the Liverpool City Region. Joe.
I'm chair of the combined policy in the Liverpool City Region. Yeah, I mean, for me, when I hear government talking about rebalancing the economy, a phrase that is, bandied about and was 6 years ago, we wondered what it was all about in terms of whether there was a seriousness about that. I'm glad to say that I genuinely believe that, in particular, George Osborne understood that in order to seriously get the economy growing in terms of getting the most out of all the cities, not just London, but the second-tier cities, that there needed to be investment within those. So, the devolution agenda, part of that, the Northern Powerhouse, was good to hear. However, it hasn't reached its full potential in terms of what it could achieve, because there's been lack of funding going through, and there's a real danger as we are in this state of flux within government, both in government and the shadow government, in terms of where we are. Well, in the Labour Party, we must be here all day, but national government, in terms of we've heard Andrea Leadsom talk about HS2, and then yesterday evening, about whether it's an investment that is not needed. And I think that again comes back to the point about that view of life outside of the southeastern bubble, about how we manage and progress if we want to grow the economy, want to rebalance the economy. So there's a real danger for us that the commitment to the concept of the Northern Powerhouse, which is based on fundamentally better transport links and connectivity across the whole of the north, whether that starts to unravel, and that's my real concern, and why we've got to maintain the pressure on central government, not only for HS2 but HS3 and that east-west connectivity, to make sure that we do. And it's interesting that, you know, when we talk about the commute to work in London, it is around, you know, 40 miles commuting into work in London. If we were looking at that commute here, and it's, you know, part of the discussion, if we were looking at that 40 miles, it spreads to Lancs, it spreads, you know, across the Pennines, and it means that you know, economic agglomeration and people agglomeration is about 10.5 million people, but a greater economic opportunity for growth. Now, you know, in London, for instance, they don't have that debate. They just say, oh, Crossrail, yeah, how many are you up to now? Crossrail 7, or something, Crossrail 8. You know, so they just tick the box, don't they? Oh, well, we need that. There you go, let's spend it. But when we talk, I can see you very sad what I'm saying, to be able to get your infrastructure commission's point of view in a second. But that seems to be how things are done. If it's the south east and it's London, that's why Judith was absolutely right to point out the discrepancy and the difference between the spend in transport, the spend in infrastructure between the north and the south. And that's why the Northern Powerhouse, as well as it being that concept that we welcome, we've got to fight to make sure that we get our fair share of investment in order to us and enabling us to grow. It really is that simple. And for me, you know, infrastructure spend, as well as the evolution, but infrastructure commitment and spend is something that we should have. And it isn't just about rail, by the way. It's about improving our roads, it's about improving that connectivity, it's about maximising the opportunity between Liverpool and Manchester, and the river and the canals. It's about all modes of transport that we need to look at across the city region. But Northern Powerhouse is real danger that it could roll back, and we've got to fight to make sure that it doesn't.
Thank you, Joe. Philip Graham is the Chief Executive of the National Infrastructure Commission, which is chaired by Lord Adonis. Philip, would you like to get at that?
Yes. Terrifyingly, this is my happy face. Because I don't really disagree with what you were saying before. We published our report on northern transport, focused particularly on intercity links in the north. In March, called High Speed North. I'd say much of the focus when that was published was around the recommendations that we made about sort of particular projects. We pushed very hard for coming back to Councillor Blake's points, for some of the investment on enhancing the M62 to be brought forward, and we're very pleased that that happened successfully in the budget. And looking towards the longer term, we suggested that, you know, the current proposed plan for an upgrade of the Trans-Pennine rail link needed to be built into a longer plan that incorporated its integration with HS2, both down to both between Sheffield and Leeds and across to Liverpool, and we were really pleased by the announcement this week that HS2 are looking seriously enough to come up with a viable proposal for bringing HS2 into Sheffield city centre, and also with longer-term plans to upgrade some of the key stations, the key nodes within the northern network. David Higgins prepared a substantial plan for linking Northern Powerhouse Rail and HS2 together in Leeds. We needed a similar plan in Manchester, and we're pleased that some of that work is being taken forward. But I think it's important not to forget that I think some of the broader messages that we made, and that if the Lord Adonis were here, we would be stressing very hard, is just as important. I think the first of those is that transport improvements and transport investment will be important to supporting growth in the north, but it will only do so, and it will only achieve the goals which it's intended to achieve if it's part of a broader strategy. Transport on its own won't make things happen, but transport linked to effective spatial planning, a plan for economic development, plans for skills development can actually unlock that. And some of the economic work we did really supported that view. The agglomeration effects multiply the greater the level of high skills jobs you have in your city centres, the greater the level of productivity in those city centres. And that's where you start to see the virtuous circle that improved transport links can support. And the second broad message, which I'm sure Lord Dennis would stress, is that as well as an ambitious long-term strategy for where you want to get to on your transport links, and I think the work that Transport for the North has been doing has been really successful in pulling that together and developing a clear set of objectives and a clear goal for improving transport in the North. That has to be broken down into a clear, deliverable, prioritised roadmap for how you get there. So you can take that to your own communities and also take it back to central government and say, here's what we want to do in the short term, here's how that links to the medium term, here's how that links to our long-term strategy. And here is how, in the course of doing so, we will develop the evidence and we will develop our plans to show how this is going to deliver the growth we want to see. And I think that becomes all the more important in current circumstances. You know, whenever all of the pieces of the jigsaw are thrown up in the air as they have been at the moment, that creates risk and it creates opportunity. There is a real chance for the North here to bring to the government's attention the messages that have come through the recent vote, and to use that as an opportunity to make the case for continued investment. But if you're going to make that case, you need to show yourselves to be credible, you need to show yourselves to be able to prioritise and to have a plan that takes you from here through the short, the medium, and long term to where you want to go. So I think there's a fantastic chance here. I hope our report has actually contributed to that. As I say, I don't disagree with Joe. I think there's a case to be made, and I hope we can help you to make, and I hope we've helped you to make it.
When you say continued investment, do you mean extra investment over and above what's already been planned?
I think the investment that has been actually promised so far is investment to develop these proposals. Once those proposals have been developed, and this is no different, going back to Joe's point, to the situation we're in London. The investment, the money that's been promised for development of Crossroad 2 is the money to develop that proposal, to get to a detailed plan that can be taken through the planning system. It's no commitment at this stage to build the project, and these schemes always go through a set of investment decisions. So it's about making the case to get to where you have clear commitments, potentially shared commitments between the devolved authorities up here and in London, to actually deliver the money to get these things built, rather than simply to develop plans to the next level of detail.
Okay, let's turn to Duncan Sim. He's from ResPublica itself, a senior policy officer and responsible recently for a report into HS2 entitled Ticket to Ride.
Yeah, maybe responsible for lots of connotations in that. That says it. Thanks, Arif. I think what's really interesting about the situation with Northern Transport at the moment is we've almost got to the stage where the question of getting improvements to Northern Transport and connectivity is no longer a live debate as to whether that happens. It's now moved into the stage of how and when that new infrastructure comes along. But I do agree with Joe that it's going to be vitally important to keep up the pressure on government, particularly with the Conservative leadership election around the corner. You know, that has been a critic of HS2 in the past, and HS2 is not especially popular with Conservative grassroots members either. So I think that is going to be another pressure point on the delivery of this infrastructure, and there is the potential for timetables to be knocked back even further if that pans out in the way that it could. We know that HS2 on its own is not going to be enough to deliver the kind of agglomeration effects that Philip's talking about, that Joe's talking about, the idea of linking up the potential 10 million people economic zone. We know from international evidence that capital and first-tier cities tend to be the ones which benefit most from connections to second or third-tier cities. So, for example, in Spain, where the Madrid-Seville high-speed line hasn't done what it promised and relocate over and relocated some of that economic activity away from Madrid and has instead fueled even faster growth in Madrid. You look at the parallel here and you can see a situation where HS2 could end up just sucking even more economic activity out of Birmingham, out of Manchester, and that's a risk that has been widely commented on. And I think what's interesting now with the situation of David Cameron, we know, is going to be out by the autumn, and there's questions as to whether George Osborne will follow. Northern powerhouse rhetoric may or may not outlive the duopoly there, but I think the case for further investment in terms of economic rebalancing is pretty much over now. Nor will HS2 alone deliver kind of balanced growth across the north, which really seems to us as something to be sort of fundamental to the idea of the Northern Powerhouse. The idea of the Northern Powerhouse is not just that Manchester gets big enough to rival London. The idea of the Northern Powerhouse is that it's about using the assets of all the cities of the north and joining them up most effectively. HS2, again, we know from international evidence, if you just connect up certain cities that have pre-existing economic advantages, all that happens is that those cities reinforce those economic advantages and accelerate faster and faster away from other cities. And this was one of the key points we put across in the picture right before, was that HS2 has to be extended into the broader trans-northern network and linked effectively into that if you're going to deliver not only higher aggregate growth across the north, but also spread that growth more evenly. So the National Infrastructure Commission reports that the Transport for the North reports have categorically established the economic benefits of that broader transport investment that we've been talking about. What they've been less clear on is who needs to be taking the lead in delivering that. And for us, ResPublica, this is an issue where it should be incumbent upon the Northern leaders to be driving forward this agenda, and actually it should be incumbent upon national government to give Northern leaders the powers and the responsibilities to drive this forward on their own timetables. Judith talked about the failure of central government to allocate resources evenly across the country. I think it's just another point that reinforces the idea that central government is not going to be able to deliver on anything like the same timescale the investment which we all, I think, agree along this panel is desperately needed. There is an emerging consensus about the long-term end goal, where you want to get to. The TFN and the NRC reports were not so completely different there. There's no question that it just wouldn't be fair necessarily handing the leads more stable leads delayed, because there would be infighting, because there would be fighting between them and the central government. I think there is a roadmap which is more or less broadly agreed on. It'd be interesting to hear whether that's agreed on the panel, but that seems to me to be the situation where we are. Northern political leaders were the ones who really helped to put this agenda on the map, and that was something that Cllr mentioned in the keynote this morning. It was Northern authorities coming together, putting out the One North report that really made this a large political issue. That they've shown that they have the necessary ambition, they've shown that they have vision. And I think it's time that they've given the tools to make that vision a reality. It's local leaders who are best placed to judge what improvements are most needed, what timescales, with what priority, and particularly in a situation where national government is going to be focusing more and more of its attention on the lengthy process of extricating ourselves from the European Union. More and more civil service time is going to be taken up with that, more political capital is going to be taken up by that. It just doesn't seem likely that this agenda is going to receive the attention that it should on Whitehall. So I think there is a huge opportunity for local areas to be trusted to step up to the plate and deliver on the needs which they know they have, but also central government knows that they have. And if you were in the hall this morning for Greg Clark's address, he talked about continuous devolution. Devolution based on local areas identifying opportunities and going to central government and saying, we want the powers and we want the money to capitalise on those opportunities. And I think that given the moderate degree of consensus that does seem to exist between local leaders and the centre on what needs to be done and what infrastructure needs to be prioritised. I think this would be a very sensible sort of trial run for that vision of devolution.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, what's your, let's just go along the panel and just, I'd like to know what your top transport priority is. What's the thing that you feel is the one, if you just have one thing, what's the most important thing that should be delivered? Jeff?
Well, I'm arguing that my favourite position would be for an east-west connectivity and HS3, I believe. But, you know, I've always argued that we shouldn't have either or, we should have both. But important to connect the west, east, central cities that can join up quickly, efficiently, you know, and can actually use that to deliver better economic output. So HS3 in terms of the west-east connectivity.
And how confident are you that that's going ahead as well as it can be at this stage?
Well, I'm not confident that it's going ahead as well as it can be. I think we're making the case, and we've used ResPublica to argue that for us as well. We've made a powerful economic case to government about HS2 coming into Liverpool. The double win you get from that is that you free up space on the West Coast main line. But if we can connect up to Manchester on HS3, it means the Goldburn Cave, we actually get onto the HS2, so you get two for the price of one. But, you know, trying to get people, members of the Infrastructure Commission, central government, and other people to understand that. I think they do understand it, but they're restricted by the amounts of funding that they want to spend. And it's all this now caught up in the politics of, you know, whether HS2 is a vanity project that rather than for economic growth. So I'm not confident that we will get HS2 or we will get HS3.
Judith, would HS3, would that be your top priority as well?
Well, it's interesting, if I go out and talk to my constituents, it's getting control back over the buses, I have to be honest. That is, you know, the number one issue for many local people, but I think it is exactly that. HS2 is almost a totemic issue in some ways, but when we started to unlock the conversations, when we went back to HS2 and said, you know, the station has to be as one, HS2 coming right in, then it led to all the conversations that Joe's just touched on. And it's that connectivity to locations within the city region, but also across the north and going up to the northeast as well. And for example, you know, we obviously in all of these scenarios look around Europe, and our twin city in France with Leeds is Lille. And when Eurostar went to Lille, you know, they were thinking very much of the speed of getting from London to Paris, but actually what it has done is opened up the whole hinterland and right up into Belgium, into the Netherlands, opening up a whole northern part of Europe. And I think it's that potential that we're really missing. And I honestly, if you know, what we often ask people to do is just put the London tube map on the north. And you've got Manchester and Leeds at the same distance apart as the central line. Sheffield and Leeds the same distance as the northern line. You wouldn't think twice if you lived in London, living at one end of the central line, working at the other end and having your leisure opportunities in the middle. If you actually look at the way that commuters move around, there is very little exchange between Manchester and Leeds, for example. And we've got to really open up that connectivity and make it, the 30 miles that it actually is, make it up to the speeds that will mean that people can move around very easily and you can get your skills, live in Leeds, have your skills in Leeds and go and work in Manchester, for example.
On the issue that you mentioned of bus regulation, are you getting bus regulation? Because I know Greater Manchester is.
Well, we have a slight local difficulty in Leeds that we haven't got a devolution deal ready to be signed off at the moment, so but we're having very active conversations with bus companies, as you can imagine. We're huge frustration in Leeds at the moment with our super tram scheme was turned down in 2005. We were told by the Department for Transport to go away and come up with a bus-based model, so we came up through Metro with the MGT, the trolley bus, and then just a matter of weeks ago we were told by DFT that we haven't made the case going back. But the big difference is that they've actually agreed that the money they would have spent on MGT has been ring-fenced and is going to come down to Leeds. So these are the things with the 173.5 million that we're going to be getting. And we're going to work with the bus companies to come up with how we can deal with congestion, free up the road space, make sure that people can actually get around.
What about HS3? Joe, a bit sceptical if that's the right word. I think there are plans, aren't there, being progressed at the moment, certainly for an upgraded link between Manchester and Leeds.
Well, this is where, when you go out and you talk about, cynical approach, how long does it take to get agreement to electrify the lines? And that's the issue. Are we talking about upgrading the existing link or building a new link coming through? And I think these are the conversations that we're having nationally with doing such.
So that's still not agreed?
It's not. It's not agreed on.
So, Philip, how do you answer the scepticism from Joe that some of this might not happen?
The first thing I'd say is, at this stage, we don't know. I think I come back to the point that I've made. Change of the kind that we are going through at the moment presents risks, but also presents opportunities. And I think it's really crucial that the authorities of the North work together to make sure that it's the opportunities that we act on the risks. I think HS2 is a totemic project. I think it is important for the transport benefits that we bring, but I think it's also important. I think this is a national issue, not just a northern issue, but I think it's important for the North. But it's just it is totemic of the perception of the UK as somewhere where big, difficult decisions can be taken and driven through and things happen. So I think the case, I was part of the team that originally developed the case for HS2. I think that case is strong, and I think it will be more than an incredible shame. I think it will be a great step backwards if HS2 doesn't continue. But it has to be linked in, and I think Duncan's points were to some degree it has to be linked into strategies at each of the sectors and into the broader plan for the network to ensure that it's not just about a line that simply connects a small part of the city centre of Manchester and a small part of the city centre of Birmingham and Leeds to a small part of the city centre of London. It's actually somewhere that helps to build the network and helps to bring people genuinely together. We were asked to look at the priorities for intercity transport in the north, and we came to the same conclusion as Joe, the same conclusion as Judith, that the crucial link has to be the Trans-Pennine link, the so-called HS3 link. And on the one hand, I am confident that the first stages of that are happening and are going to happen. And don't underestimate the importance of the franchise improvements that are coming through.
What is the first stage that you're confident in?
The first stage is the franchise improvements. Those make a big difference to journey time and a huge difference to capacity, and that's on its way. The second stage is the electrification and associated upgrade of the current line, which was delayed, but there's now a firm date of 2022 for that. That's my understanding. There's a plan in place that's being developed. The third part of this,
so you're confident about that as well?
I'm confident about that. That's built into network development plans for the control period. I'm confident that that's going to move through. I think the third stage, which we say has to be built into the planning now, is where to go after that. You need to plan the medium term and the long term together so you don't go down a cul-de-sac. And that part is really important to go out and make a case for. That may be a new line, significant sections of new line. And the report that we had done for us suggested that we could the journey time down to 30 minutes through quite significant additional tunnelling, quite significant sections of the line, but that looking an entire new route across the Pennines. That might or might not be right. Our report was done to a fairly rapid timetable. There will be further detailed analysis to be done on any of this, but the really crucial thing is to keep the pressure on that the current upgrade which is being planned is a stated posting.
Well, what is it that the council leaders or the North of England hasn't yet done, which it has to do? Because I think they would say to me, well, we've already presented those arguments and those plans and said how good it is.
I think the perception, I don't work in Whitehall anymore, but I think the perception in Whitehall, and I think this is the thing that you have to carry, is that the Transport for the North are developing a well-worked overall strategy, and they are presenting good plans for where they want to get to in terms of the overall network for the North. But at the moment, they are progressing each of the elements of that strategy in parallel, and they need to get to a point where they can show that they've brought their stakeholders together, they've brought the members of the partnership together to have not just a strategy and a strategy with an end point, but a strategy with a prioritised plan for how you get there.
Joe, there needs to be a more cohesive strategy.
I know, and look, I'm not usually one to insult people, but I mean, you move from Whitehall to the Infrastructure Commission, you're institutionalised in your view of life. The fact is, we have Transport for the North, we talk with models about connectivity. And it comes back here to the fact that what I said and what Judith said about the spend. If this was London, it'd been done. In China, we've been talking about HS2 for about 4 years in China. They've built it up. High-speed track to circumnavigate the world.
I found that
in that time. No, let me finish, because you laid down a challenge about what leaders should do, and I'm making the point what leaders already done. Okay, now Transport for the North does not have the same here as London does in Transport for London. So it's wrong to give the impression that leaders or Transport for the North hasn't said what is needed. We have. It comes back to the mindset. You're part of the National Infrastructure Commission, and you've got to persuade government to actually invest. And that's where the problem lies. It's not necessarily with you, but that institution of central government and Whitehall isn't going to commit the same resources here in the North as it does in the South. And we've got to break that down, and it really is simple. It's not leaders of the North that haven't got the vision or the plan about connectivity in the North. It is us that hasn't got the plan to actually develop the Northern Powerhouse. It's the resources and the infrastructure spend and money that we need to actually deliver it. It really is that simple.
It took a quarter of a century to get Crossrail from a plan to something that was going through the House of Parliament. The idea that things simply happen in London because someone comes along and has a trip simply isn't true. The Northern Powerhouse is moving fast. It's moving faster than Crossrail ever moved. HS2 has moved as fast as anything has moved within the G8 over recent years. So things can happen. They are happening. They're moving fast. We have been making the case for this for our report. But I'm just saying, there are continuing perceptions. It's not you have to keep the pressure on.
Yeah,
and I'm not disagreeing with you.
And on keep the pressure on, we agree. But fundamentally, I don't buy that things are happening fast. The evidence shows that things aren't happening fast.
Well, things never happen fast.
But Judith's just been talking about, we've got this connectivity between Manchester and Leeds, and we don't even know what it is. We're only removing pacer trains in 4 years' time of being in the north. It takes you 3 hours to get from Liverpool to Leeds. It's ridiculous. It wouldn't happen in the south east.
Quick response from Judith.
Okay, can I just think, because actually, if I understand what the Brexit vote was all about, it is a massive vote of lack of confidence in the Westminster model of government, of decisions being made remotely that have a massive effect on the economies of the people in the north. I think, what the Northern Powerhouse has done for us, whether it actually exists or it's real, it's given us a confidence that we have never had before. And when we go over to China, for example, and the visitors come back from Malaysia, they understand the concept of the North. It is on a scale that they are now talking to us in terms of investment. And if you think of the north of England with a population of 15 million, that's dwarfs Scotland and Wales put together. You know, and if we were classed as one economy, we would be the 21st largest economy in the world. I think it's up to us to start setting the agenda and being a lot more assertive. But what Joe is reflecting is there is a complete lack of trust in our view from Whitehall, and they just don't trust us, and they feel that they can make these decisions remotely. We have got to step up to the plate, and I think what is happening through Transport for the North, through the fact that money through the Infrastructure Commission is being dedicated to North, then I think the confidence is growing, and we need everyone, all of our partners, our business leaders, to come together with us. And if Whitehall won't come up with the money, then we need to get our act together and go and get funding coming in from other parts of the world to make us enable us to move forward and to deliver what we know we can do.
Right, I'm going to take all these questions in a second, but a quick response from you.
I think Judith hit the nail on the head. I think things may be moving relatively fast on a sort of Whitehall timescale, but they could be moving faster if the right powers were developed and the human investment were attracted there.
Do you think the system's there?
I don't think that the system is inherently unfair. I think that the problem is that there is perhaps insufficient recognition of how quickly there is insufficient recognition of the confidence of how quickly things could move if those powers were involved. And you look at, say, Birmingham and the enormous effects that the regeneration that's happening there already. Before a single high-speed train was run, Birmingham, I think, had an increase of office space development of something like 800% between 2014 and 2030. If you can give local leaders the authority and the responsibility to say, go ahead, make the plans, we will give you the go-ahead to deliver it, then the law perhaps would accelerate even faster, because that would be the critical spur to drawing in the kind of input investment that would make all the sort of non-transport effects that we're talking about here. And transport being just a catalyst for growth, it isn't growth in itself. If you get the transport right, then the growth follows. And if you can get the delivery of the transport right, then the growth will follow even faster.
Thank you. Questions? One here? Oh, there's a microphone coming on one side. Oh yeah, can you just tell us who you are?
I'm Alison from Go to My Student Network. This is from a personal perspective. I live in a rural area, and over the last 8 years, I spent 4 years commuting to Manchester, a couple of years commuting to Sheffield, a couple of years commuting to Bradford. And actually, I don't think the transport system is too bad. If I want to go to Liverpool, it's 20 minutes into Manchester, 40 minutes into Liverpool. I think it's nice to talk about the macro structure, if you like, but I think if you ask most commuters who do use the public transport system, it's the microstructure that may be the issue. So for example, in the rural towns where it's free parking, there's not enough parking. If I want to park in Manchester and use the train to go out of Manchester, it costs a fortune to leave my car there. Or the buses are not good enough that are going to get you in to match up with the other transport going onward elsewhere in the north. So I think there needs to be more of a focus on some of the microstructure to improve that before we start talking about macrostructure.
One question, Andy.
Thanks very much. Andy Bounds from the Financial Times. Enjoying the discussion, I must say. Philip, just one for you. The Transport for the North published a report last week, I'm sure you saw, about the potential economic impact of their detailed plans over the next few years. Is that something that's going to carry weight? Because the big stumbling block I'm always led to believe is the notorious green book the Treasury has, which effectively skews any pound of investment, is almost always better spent in the southeast than it is anywhere else. And I just wondered if that had moved the dial at all, as Richard Pennycook believes it has.
You answer that, then. Absolutely.
I think that report will contribute to pushing the dial that is already moving. I think the Treasury Group book provides a well-developed, long-standing approach to looking at the economic benefits of transport projects. But it's been acknowledged for a long time that it's only part of the picture. If you were to take decisions purely on that basis, you wouldn't be taking probably strategic decisions. I think the fact that the policy is moving in the direction that it's moving indicates that the dial is shifting. The work that has been done for us, the work that was done for HS2 Limited, is demonstrating that there are other ways of looking at the benefits of these kinds of projects. And I think that's really important. So I think the dial is moving. I think you have to understand all of the you have to look at these pictures in the round. I don't think the Transport for the North report is suddenly going to trip a switch and the world's going to think about these things in a completely different way overnight. But I think it's another part of the evidence of that order of evidence.
Joe, micro commutation.
Yeah, I think it's what's on. The debate, what I'm engaging in, is around the infrastructure, if you like, the macro stuff. But you're absolutely right that connectivity amongst each other, the devolution can help us with that as well in terms of defranchising the buses, in terms of the negotiations, how we use the devolved powers of, for instance, Rail North and that investment, how we make sure we get better stations, better connectivity. All of those things are for us to do as reason leaders under the devolution deal as well. But the point Andy makes about comes, if you like, back to the heart of my argument about the belief. I don't know whether I wasn't here this morning when Greg Cllr made his contribution, but he's what I believe to be a progressive conservative who understands that in order to enable cities like Liverpool and the city region and Manchester and its region to support and sustain itself, then you need to give it the tools to unlock growth and give it the ability to do that. Transport is part of that, and I'm sure he would have said, and always said it publicly over the last couple of days, that he's not enthusiastically supported by members of the cabinet in relation to the Northern Powerhouse concept and devolution, and also HS2. So that's the point, and that's the argument about we have to continue, and especially post-Brexit, to make sure that we are supported in this way. Now, Philip may well talk about the dial is in motion. What concerns me is that it may well be moving backwards as well as forward on occasion, and that's the real concern for me.
Can I just see if there's a couple more questions? Maybe over there.
Hi, thanks. I'm Alison Knight, Cheshire West and Chester Council. We've heard an awful lot about the cities and connectivity, and obviously for Cheshire West and Chester we're on the edge of the Northern Powerhouse and also connected to North Wales. And the question that I have for the panel is how they see that as a priority, opening up the routes for rural economies, but also really successful economies that can connect to Liverpool, Manchester, Leeds, but also opening up opportunities to North Wales.
Thank you. Jenny's there. She's just here. And then Philip, and then I'll say no to Philip because he's in charge, and then Helen.
Thank you. A colleague from Chester West and Cheshire actually just beat me to it. I'm genuine from Lancashire, and I think Lancashire's had one mention from one panellist today. We talk about 15 million people as part of the Northern Powerhouse, 1.2 million of them live in Lancashire, and I'm rather concerned that we've spent an awful lot of time and an awful lot of money will be spent on HS2, which won't be Preston Station, which is the third busiest. But also, what are the plans to actually increase the connectivity the Northern Powerhouse is more than Liverpool, Manchester, Leeds and Sheffield. I don't even think Newcastle's got a mention. But, we have aerospace, we're the leading aerospace employers in the whole of the country. We've got a huge amount that we can give to the economy of the Northern Powerhouse, but we do need the connectivity to allow us to do it.
Okay, thanks, Philip.
Yeah, I mean, I found myself agreeing with both colleagues from Chester and Lancashire. But really, I just want to agree with both Joe and Judith. As long as we have a model that asks for a fixed sum from the centre, we're never going to get anywhere. And it's precisely that model that's got to change. And I think Richard Lee said this morning, I think he's right, if the North speaks with one voice, it's going to be very difficult to say no. And what we propose in the manifesto, where I talk about a Council of the North, is that's what I want to establish. What worries me is we're in a situation where northern cities are fighting with each other to be connected. Whereas actually what they should be doing is say, we all want to be connected, and what we want are the conditions where we can part finance this. Now in the work we did for Liverpool with Joe, we came up with a completely new novel tip that no one's ever come up with before about national insurance contributions and growth. What I think the North should do is come up with its own models where it can part finance up to 50% or a third of this type of infrastructure. So we're not always going and asking, but it's crucial to speak with one voice and have whole North solutions. And then any party, particularly that has a fragile majority, will have to concede. And I think, I feel sorry for Philip, because Philip's in an impossible position, and I think we should recognise that. He's not in control of these funds. But really, I think what the North has to do is develop its ask beyond an ask. It's got to develop a financial package that it's asking for that means it won't have to keep going back to the centre to try to deliver what it rightly wants to do.
Philip, that's exactly the point I was making, and I think the confidence that we've got now is on a level I've never experienced before. And actually the collaboration that's developing, and apologies to both Jenny and Alison. When I've been talking about, I feel very privileged to be here from Yorkshire, I have to say, breaking over the Pennines and everything. But everything I've been saying is about that. We talk about Leeds, Liverpool, and Manchester, but actually we're now talking about Leeds City region, Greater Manchester, etc. And there is a much greater sense that the cities on their own are not going to deliver the agenda. So for us, the conversations about connectivity with Wakefield, Huddersfield, Dewsbury, all of Calderdale are just as important as looking forward, up to North Yorkshire and across to Lincolnshire as well. So that it is very much part. And Jenny, I add Cumbria to your list as well. Absolutely critical part of the North. In conversations like that, it's perhaps a little bit difficult to be encompassed. But I think this is the thing. I don't think the genie can be put back in the bottle. I think that the conversation, whatever happens to George Osborne, it's up to us to keep foot on the accelerator, if that's the appropriate way to describe it, just to make sure that our voice is heard and to recognise actually the power that we do have. And I know if Richard was here, he would be talking about the conversations that are going on with North Wales, for example. It's something that we're very mindful of. But going back to Alison, the integrated ticketing. Please, can we get that onto the agenda? The nonsense of anyone wanting to use public transport for wherever they come from, and the number of different tickets that they have to negotiate to get around it is crippling our ambition to move forward.
Okay.
Rounds to be optimistic.
Right, okay. Philip?
I really strongly agree with my name's anything to say. I'm nervous about saying this, given where I sit, the conversation we just had with Joe. But I think there are some things to learn from London here, not because London is what the North wants to be, but to look at, coming back to the fact that it has taken a quarter of a century to get Crossrail moving. There are three things that fit exactly with this. One is persistence. The dial will move forward and the dial will occasionally move back, but keep on at the messages. I think Joe would be insane if he didn't sit here and tell me things aren't moving fast enough. However much I say they're moving very fast. What is the point in agreeing with me? Persistence is absolutely crucial. A common voice is absolutely crucial. London sounds like it has a common voice, but actually, if you sit down with all the boroughs, they all have completely different views. But they have been able to come together. They've had strong leadership, and so they speak with a common voice. And the third is exactly as you said, making the right contribution to the cost. Crossrail is broadly 15% funded by London, 50% by central government. It's not exactly that, but it's that kind of thing. And there are three things that you can learn. It's taken London, as I say, 20, 30 years to get to this point. The North could do it within less than a decade. So there's a fantastic opportunity here, and I think you're absolutely right that that's the way to make it happen.
Duncan, quick reaction. We don't need you to agree with your boss, but what about this other, the other parts of the North that being included?
Sure. So our report, which we did for Joe, was very clear that it's important for Liverpool and cities like Liverpool not to get caught up just looking at the city region and developing just city region strategies and not looking beyond those boundaries. It's vital that good working relationships continue with areas which have historically been connected, not politically necessarily, but socially and economically. And North Wales and Chester absolutely fall into that category. But I think Judith is absolutely right again that this is an absolutely crucial moment, and that's why the focus on the macro and the city connectivity, the intercity connectivity, is absolutely the right way to go at the moment, because if it's ever going to happen, I think it's going to happen in the next year.
Yeah, a couple of things. Northern Powerhouse means everybody in the north, and so Jenny and to Cheshire and Chester and the whole of the north. I want them to grow. We want better connectivity to hold the care. It's interestingly, Bentley can't ship any cars out from Superport and from Liverpool because there's no connectivity. And it's madness, isn't it, that not one container that comes in the Superport of Liverpool goes out by rail and all goes by road, and it's madness. And so we made that case in the report, and we also, Philip talked about a different way of funding the link into Liverpool, and I offered before the report was published over, when did they go to the Tory conference 2 years ago, and I actually made the offer then to pay some part of that funding across the city region, so it's not as if we're doing that. And I also, Philip, wanted to disagree with you about Crossrail and learning stuff from London. The reality is that Crossrail 2 and Crossrail and even Heathrow, for instance, are caught in political posturing. And that's why it takes so long. We would get on with it, given the money, given the chance. So don't please label us up with the political posture in terms of that goes on there. But the reality is, for me, whether it's doing it ourselves, whether it's part funding it or whatever, we need a complete change of attitude from government that recognises that the North can grow. It comes back to the very, very point that I made before. I don't want Liverpool or Liverpool City region or Manchester or any part of the North not to punch above its weight in terms of contributing to the UK PLC. I want it to do that because we all want to do that. And I come from a very, very simple model of keep it simple, KISS. That if we don't grow the economy and don't create a strong economy and therefore earn money, we can't spend it. And I want Liverpool and its city region, its hinterland, and also Manchester, Leeds and Sheffield. And by the way, I did mention when I said west to east, Jenny, about Newcastle, and Hull. That's what I mean by west to east connecting us all. And if we are able to do that, we can make that contribution. It's just that we're not getting that opportunity, simply because Whitehall don't view it as something that they can trust. That's why Greg Clark makes his comments. We've got a long way to go to convince the Whitehall mandarins that the North should get support.
It's because the South has the private sector infrastructure that can fund the development, and the North has yet to develop it at scale. We've got to persuade the government to fund it from the future private sector that we're trying to.
And that's why the powerhouse isn't just about transport, it's about all of the things that create economic growth. Philip, your key guest is going to be left waiting.
Oh, well, we better go. Yes.
Thank you very much to my panel for a lively and fascinating discussion on that, and best of luck to you all in getting home as well.